Okay, well, we're going to go ahead and get started. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this last program in the summer series, Adirondacks for All, Identity and Environmental Justice in the North Country. This program series has been jointly presented by the Adirondack Experience, the Adirondack Diversity Initiative, the Wild Center, and the Nature Conservancy. This last program offers a forward-looking view of Adirondack conservation, touching upon themes of ecocentrism, rights of nature, and social and economic justice. I'm Eric Reardon, Project Director, and let me just take a moment to voice my heartfelt thanks to all of you who have tuned into these programs this summer. It has really been my pleasure and the pleasure of all the partner organizations to provide a forum for these very important conversations. I would like to start this evening's program by acknowledging that the Adirondack Experience and the Wild Center are situated on the Aboriginal territories of the Mohawk and Abenaki people. Indigenous people continue to live in this region and practice their teachings and their life ways. This program, titled The Future of Adirondack Stewardship, Climate, Ecology, and Community, features a conversation between Blake Lavia, Sinzun Aguilar-Izo, Caroline Dodd, and Jen Kretzer. Blake Lavia is a multimedia artist and community organizer, currently living in the St. Lawrence River Valley at the foothills of the Adirondack Mountains, Haudenosaunee territory. Through their work with environmental storytelling group Talking Wings, Blake Lavia has organized numerous conferences, curated in-person and virtual art exhibitions, and produced visual storytelling pieces that spotlight water and earth guardians. Their art practice dances between filmmaking, writing, photography, animation, mixed media illustration, and spotlights structural violence, cultural memory, and our current climate crises. In recent projects, such as the North Country Rights of Nature Symposium, Blake Lavia is striving to bring communities together to discuss how to build an ecocentric and just reality for the region and the world. Sinzun Aguilar-Izo is an environmental artist and movement weaver who is currently working to spotlight stories of regenerative solutions to the climate crises in the North Country, Haudenosaunee territory. As part of Talking Wings, they have collaborated with Blake Lavia on several art and community-centered environmental projects, such as the North Country Art, Land, and Environment Summit and Confluence, a tapestry of rivers and their guardians. Talking Wings is currently embarking on a new endeavor in which they are weaving together a regional collaboration to co-create an ecocentric governance system for waterways and draft a Bill of Rights for North Country rivers. Caroline Dodd is a lifelong Adirondacker, climate activist, and cross-country ski coach. She was a founding member of the Wild Center's Youth Climate Program, where she continues to serve on the Youth Advisory Board. She studied environmental science and policy at Cornell University, where she researched climate change mitigation for the Kingdom of Tonga, traveling to the United Nations climate negotiations in Poland. Caroline has since served as a legislative advocate for the Adirondacks, a ski instructor, and a winter sports events coordinator. She will attend graduate school in environmental policy this fall. She can also be found playing her flute and singing at Chapel Island on Upper Saranac Lake. Caroline plans to carry her passions for climate justice and local climate solutions into the climate policy space. Jen Kretzer is Director of Climate Initiatives at the Wild Center and leads climate change engagement programs, including the Youth Climate Change Program, which was highlighted by the Obama White House Office of Science and Technology. She also develops interpretive programs for visitors, including the New Climate Solutions exhibit and other climate-related initiatives and community partnerships. In 2015, she represented the Wild Center and the Association of Science Technology Centers at the UN COP21 climate talks in Paris and is working to help seed youth climate summits around the world. In 2022, she led the Wild Center's delegation at the UN COP26 climate conference in Glasgow, Scotland. Kretzer is an active member of the New York State Climate Resilience and Education Task Force, serves on numerous boards, including the Climate Literacy Energy Awareness Network, Adirondack Mountain Club, and the Adirondack Diversity Initiative. I would invite everyone to please feel free to submit any questions you may have during this evening's program through the question at the bottom of your screen. And I will now turn the program over to Jen. Jen, welcome.
Thank you so much, Eric, for the introductions and for organizing this evening's program. I'm so honored to be a part of this conversation tonight with Caroline, Blake, and Sinsoon. And I wanted to just take a little bit more time to let everyone share a little bit more information about themselves and the work that they do and their connection to the Adirondacks. So I think we'll start first with Blake and Sinsoon, if you all want to talk a little bit more as we kind of dive into our big conversation topic tonight. So please share.
First of all, hello, so honored to be here. My name is Sinsoon.
My name is Blake.
And we're both part of Talking Wings. Here, as Eric mentioned, we're in the St. Lawrence, the Kaneohe River watershed, Haudenosaunee territory, which is at the northern end of the Adirondack Mountains. So, to describe a little bit of our work tonight, we first want to situate the conversation, at least our portion of the conversation, within all of the amazing conversations that have already been happening during this series. Discussions about the original people, the indigenous communities that have stewarded this land and water since time immemorial. Discussions about the abolitionists who have led the Adirondack region and created spaces in which people could be safe. Conversations about gender, conversations about the prison system of the Adirondacks, and conversations about specifically the inequalities that lie underneath the myth that is the Adirondack Mountains. So both in all of this amazing picture that has been painted throughout this series, the work that we do speaks to a number of different things. First of all, it speaks to policy, environmental policy. And we all know that environmental policy has really shaped what the Adirondack looks like. But usually it's policy from afar. It's people downstate, it's people in Albany. They're coming in and dictating what this space, which is the Adirondack Mountains, looks like. And this discourse, these legislations really affect the people that live in the Adirondack Mountains and the very ecosystems that keep them alive. It affects the communities. It transforms the communities. And many times these communities feel resistance. They do not like that there's somebody up there dictating what they do. From the very beginning, this space at Adirondacks was envisioned as a playground for the rich, for the wealthy. In the very beginning, when it was first put as an idea out into the public sphere, it was envisioned as a place where usually he, him, men could demonstrate their masculinity. From that point on, it's also been a place where the wealthy, from the Rockefellers to the Vanderbilts, could have their gigantic castles where they would keep everybody out. It's been a place where logging companies could come and, quote unquote, exploit the wilderness and take resources away from communities. So it goes without saying that sometimes the communities in Adirondacks, they don't look very positively at environmental legislation because it's something that's not theirs. It comes from somewhere else. So the work that we do kind of wants to shift that around. We are right now working on a Bill of Rights for the waterways of the region. Now that could be very scary for many people. However, we want this to be community-centered, for the communities themselves to have a voice and for the ecosystems themselves to have a voice. And this all works within the frame of rights of nature. What is rights of nature? It's saying that the ecosystems that keep life alive have the same rights, inherent rights, rights of standing, legal rights within our legal system. It's also a paradigm shift in which you don't see nature as a commodity, but as a friend, as a relative, as a neighbor. So, not to delve too deeply, I'm going to pass the mic on to Blake to describe a little about what we have been doing in this region.
So how did we start working with rights of nature? It all started as an idea. We started hearing about rights of nature here in this country and in other countries. And we were like, why not for the local watersheds. Why not for the St. Lawrence? Why not for the Grass, the Racket, the Oswegatchie, all these rivers? We are at the eaves of the Great Lakes. The Great Lakes have 21% of the drinking water, the fresh water in the world. And we have a wealth here. We are just like the St. Lawrence comes from the Great Lake, and we have tributaries that go into the St. Lawrence. So we have a lot of water, and with the climate crisis and other parts of the country growing dry, people are gonna soon turn towards us and say, we need this water. So like knowing that this place is gonna see massive migration due to the climate crisis, knowing that this water is gonna be threatened and is already threatened, we started thinking about why not giving rights, personhood rights, to the local bodies of water and ecosystems. And it started all with a group of students from the Adirondacks to Akwesasne. They came together, and together we organized the Rights of Nature Symposium that happened this past March 22nd. And the students came up with the questions that they asked to the local panelists that also were from the Adirondacks, all the way from Akwesasne. And after the symposium, it was like a fire was lit, and a lot of people decided that they wanted to join. So it wasn't just youth from 15 to 25. It became a movement that sees people like from elders to actually 15-year-old. So now we got together, and together we created a Bill of Rights for the St. Lawrence River watershed. I'm gonna quickly show you. Expand it greatly, but to just give you an idea of what we mean when we say we want to give rights to the local waterways. We mean the right to exist, regenerate, flourish, evolve, adapt, and thrive. The right to restoration, recovery, and preservation. The right to support life and the flow of energy that unites the natural communities within its watershed. Also, we want to talk about like what kind of responsibilities do the local communities have? Because when we talk about protecting the rights of the river, we talk about the responsibilities of the communities that live by these rivers that have to protect it. So to mention some of them is the to respect its natural cycles and processes, acknowledge our ecological duty to advocate for the river, nature reciprocal relations that foment healthy human and natural communities. So we hope to see this movement grow, and we hope to see many more watershed guardians that will join us.
Thank you so much for that lovely introduction to the work that you do. And also, I really appreciated, Sinsun, you pulling together sort of the intersectional nature of all of the past conversations, which will be showing up throughout our discussion tonight and really important ways. So I can't wait I was taking notes as you were talking, and I can't wait to dive into some more of what you said and what perspectives you're both bringing. So thank you for that. Caroline, could you please share a little bit more about yourself and what brought you to the conversation today, and a little bit more about your own journey?
Sure. Thank you, Jen and Eric for introducing me, and Blake and Sinsun for your work. I'm excited to kind of get going and talking. So hopefully I won't take up too much time. I have a few photos to share so that you're not just looking at my face. So my name is Caroline Dodd, and I am as in my bio, I grew up in the Adirondacks. I grew up kind of really close to nature, skiing, running, canoeing, and with a deep-seated appreciation for the region. And I continue to kind of pursue new ways to interface with this region and introduce it to new people. I owe my entry into climate work to the Wild Center's Youth Climate Program, which I was a founding member of way back in the day, along with Jen and many other really inspiring activists. And I knew even in my young high school years that I felt called to dedicate myself to climate work. And I'm proud that the program has expanded internationally and helped empower students all over the world with climate solutions to enact in their own communities, and kind of shown them how climate is impacting their communities and the kind of global context for climate change and community climate action. I went on to explore climate solutions. Oops, I can't make this go forwards. Anyway, I went on to explore climate action at the nexus of policy, communications, and environmental justice. And I researched climate adaptation mechanisms for the Kingdom of Tonga. The delegation is pictured here, and accompanied the delegation to Poland to COP24, the climate negotiations there. I also served as a youth delegate to the United Nations Youth Climate Summit, where I helped bring the topic of disproportionate climate impacts on women and children to the conversation. And my experiences in international policy kind of helped contextualize my work here in the Adirondacks and its global implications. I've since brought my work back to the park, and as my bio mentioned, worked in legislative advocacy, represented the Adirondacks in state level policy discussions, and helped the village of Lake Placid become a climate smart community certified. And in my recent work in winter sports, I've become even more hyper aware of the direct impacts of climate change on winter sports, but also of the inequity of access to outdoor recreation in this region. And because of that, I felt inspired to continue my study in environmental policy, where I am also coaching a cross-country ski team. And I look forward to my continued exploration of how these passions intersect with one another, especially here in the Adirondacks, and also how local and state level climate action can make this region more climate resilient, and how we can involve all of us and make the Adirondacks more accessible and equitable.
Thank you so much, Caroline. It's of course, I've known you since you were in 8th grade when you started with the youth climate program, and it's so wonderful to hear your journey, now, and thank you for being here tonight. So I wanted to, there's so much to talk about, and the topic of thinking about the future state of the Adirondacks, and ecology and community and stewardship is it's a big topic. And I think when we were all preparing for this, we were like, wow, there's so many directions where we could go tonight. And I prepared some questions to kind of kick us off. And I think one of the things that coming from, and having also grown up here in the Adirondacks and been living back here as an adult for quite a while now, I often think about this concept of stewardship, and it's a word that I hear a lot, and especially in environmental circles. And I wonder if we could start the conversation tonight by exploring this idea of stewardship, and who are the stewards of this place historically and in the present, and what does that concept actually mean, and how does it account for new generations, new other perspectives, and how might it change moving forward? So I guess we'll start with that. That's our first question. But looking and thinking about what that concept of stewardship means to you. And so I think we'll start again going back to Blake and Sinsoon. And why don't you just dive right in?
So Thank you so much for that amazing question. And stewardship is a very complicated topic. And I think, Jen, you referenced a lot of the reasons why it's hard to grapple with, especially when it comes to the Adirondacks. So first of all, I want to start off with the perspective that I myself did not grow up in this area. I myself am living in a settler community as a settler on Haudenosaunee Mohawk territory. So in saying stewardship, want to, of course, acknowledge the original stewards of this land who are still doing amazing work, quote unquote, stewarding these ecosystems, specifically the Akwesasne Mohawk Nation, which is 45 minutes from us, but also many other indigenous original people throughout what is known as the Adirondacks. Then we need to reference the fact that stewardship also denotes a sense of a power dynamic to a slight degree. So it's the human beings, us as a species, that are quote unquote stewarding an ecosystem or a place. And this power dynamic is very complicated because it kind of is the underpinnings of this society. It's the underpinnings of our economy. And it's necessary to kind of, in working with this, to kind of reposition us as humans and to say, okay, we're not just us looking after an ecosystem. The ecosystem is looking after us in many cases. In many cases, we are also an ecosystem. So we have to really say we're just working in harmony with the world around us, and how best we can honor our roles and responsibilities within that dynamic. And
I would agree with Sinsun. Every time I hear the word stewardship, I'm confused by it, and by the role that it implies as a human. I see it as we having a responsibility towards the environment. And as Sinsun said, I am not native to the Adirondacks, and I moved here in my late teens to go to college, to SUNY Potsdam. So I come from completely another continent. And yet, in the context of me not even like really belonging to this land from birth, and not even from generation past, I feel the responsibility as a sense of citizens of the world, of me now being here and being like, oh my gosh, all this water, it's the water of the world. And I want to know that all the beings that live in this water and the climate that this water supports, that does not support only the climate of these areas, because if this water goes, if something happens here, it's going to affect the entire globe. That I feel is what stewardship is, for me at least. It's like in the complexity of the term, is like a sense of responsibility in a global scale, being me here now, and having the even small power to say, I don't agree with losing it all for everybody.
Thank you for that really thoughtful response on this concept. I have also grappled with the complexity of the issue and or the complexity of that term and what it means in my own sort of like very traditional education and in natural resources, and that kind of concept of creating that power dynamic. I think that you mentioned between like I am responsible for taking care of this place, and what does that really look like and mean? So I appreciate the nuances that you brought up. And how it is those power dynamics around that concept of stewardship that can be hard to unpack and hard to think about what does that mean now and for the future. And I wonder, Caroline, if you might speak to that a little bit more about sort of your own ideas of stewardship, and you've worked with a number of different organizations in the Adirondacks and growing up here, and as well as, you know, coming from the perspective of kind of the next generation, like where does stewardship show up for you?
Sure. So I echo Blake and Sinsun in kind of not really loving the fact that stewardship implies and almost necessitates the separation between ourselves and the natural world around us, and also that we have this overbearing responsibility to steward the land that we live on. And the question of who benefits from stewardship kind of brings up, like, are we stewarding this land so that we can enjoy it, or are we stewarding this land so that it can perpetuate for generations beyond ours? And, you know, the Adirondack Park was founded under this kind of very, you know, traditional definition of stewardship, where wilderness was protected, and we used wilderness kind of ethics, which are based in Western thinking about the environment. And the reality is that none of the land that we have to take care of is untouched, and none of it is undisturbed by human intervention. And so it becomes a question of, is stewardship us trying to preserve some sort of arbitrary definition of what the wilderness should be, or is it kind of trying to use a combination of science and observation to kind of figure out how a dynamic ecosystem that we know is changing and that is being changed by humans can be best kind of preserved, and how the lives that depend on it, including ours, but also the lives of, you know, animals and plants that depend on it, can be preserved. And in terms of intergenerational equity, it's a question of we've been given this world that's obviously under crisis from climate change and pollution and all sorts of environmental destruction. So how do we take the world we have now, and not an arbitrary definition based on, you know, sometime in the 1850s before we destroyed it, and kind of shape it so that the future generations don't have a world of, you know, turmoil and completely destroyed ecosystems to live with.
Blake and Sinsoon, do you have any sort of follow-up after hearing Caroline's response, or any additional thoughts about it? And we had actually a couple comments come in on in the Q&A, which I can also share.
So basically, off of everything, all the amazing things that you said, Caroline, just to echo and generally just add that when it comes to work to this concept of how to again change the power dynamic, but also at the same time make sure that you are being a caretaker, but realizing also the need that the world around you, ecosystems around you are also caretakers for you. That there is this reciprocity between all of these caretakers, and having a reciprocal relationship means that we are giving something and they're giving something to us. It's a gift and a gift returned. And it's this dynamic interaction that speaks about how we can work in harmony with the world around us. It was definitely not considered when, as was mentioned before, in the 1950s, it kind of threw out the idea of creating this line around what should be the quote unquote wilderness, a line that was then afterwards politicized. And of course, there's so many other issues with who was the original people that were the quote unquote stewards of the Adirondacks, and the problems with that. But at the moment, currently, there's a need to think about, if we're going to create an ecocentric and egalitarian reality, we really need to think of a democracy of species in which all of us are valued for who we are, and we can work together.
I want to come back to this concept of a democracy of species. That's so interesting. One of the comments or question that came in from the audience, thank you, was around the role that technology plays in the future stewardship of the park, specifically around social media. And I would, I would just love to hear your thoughts around that. Caroline, do you want to go ahead? Yeah,
sure. I can speak to that. That's an interesting question, and I think it especially applies to the Adirondacks, where there are so many people who kind of use their experiences, particularly recreating in this area, as a platform on social media. And I'm pretty well connected in kind of that community of people, and there are certain actors who have really powerful, very negative voices there. And I've seen a lot of recent vitriol directed towards different people who are just like spewing really negative things about the way that certain people interact with the environment. And it may be true that the accused parties are, you know, posting the location of a very remote place that we are trying to you know, keep preserved, and so we can't tell people where it is. But the problem with that then becomes, you know, we're gatekeeping this place, and we're gatekeeping what we define as like the wildest parts of it for a certain few who have the knowledge and the, you know, connections to others. And so I think that social media, because it's so ingrained in our community, especially here in the Adirondacks, but really anywhere, it's a really powerful place where people communicate with each other, and some people turn to it to find out where they should go in the outdoors. And so it is important that that it is a place where, first of all, we are inclusive of everyone who is, you know, enjoying this place or visiting, or especially people who have not been well represented in outdoor spaces or who have faced marginalization in outdoor spaces. But it's also important that social media is not a place where we, you know, glorify kind of peak bagging and all of these other kind of problematic in different ways modes of recreation. So I guess stewardship can be social media can be a powerful tool in stewardship. It can also be sort of a negative force.
Blake and Sinsoon, do you have any thoughts around the social media or technology aspects of what that might mean for future stewardship at the park, or how we might utilize those tools now?
I think stewardship, social media and stewardship, or in general, it's a tool. Like technology is a tool, and depends how you use it. So in an ideal world, it's an ideal tool, because we communicate across borders, we disseminate information, we can agree, not agree, discuss. It's like this global community. But we don't live in the perfect world, and we know who owns social media. And I think when we talk about social media and technology, we need to first of all talk about who owns it. And that's the underlying problem, because multi-million-dollar corporation own social media that not only sell the information of who uses it and the images and so on, but they also decide what counts, what matters, and what information goes out and what information cannot go out. And when it comes to environmental policy and serious environmental work, it's usually blocked. So I think social media can be used as a tool, but as a tool owned by the same people who are destroying the world. A tool that in the long run is destroying the world, because who is powering all this technology? What is powering it? Gigantic computers that are now in some of the hottest areas of the country. So I think social media is a good start, but we need to go back to the people and to the community. And I think the Adirondack in particular could benefit from recreating a real community. And social media, of course, it's the jumping point. It can help transmit information, but reality and people together reuniting with their ecosystem, I think, is the only way for us to have a planet in the future. And to have also people in the future, because they're not doing us any good, these technological screens.
Thank you for that, and thanks for the question, Anthony. I wanted to sort of get back to this concept of this ecocentric viewpoint. I have a quote that I wanted to share which is we are part of nature, not apart, not separate. Every day is an opportunity to bridge that gap, and art is one of the tools that we need to use in that process. And that is a quote from Luisa Riviera, an artist who actually created some work in our new climate solutions exhibit at the Wild Center, the art's called Regenerative Agriculture. And I just wonder if we could talk a little bit more about that concept of ecocentric. And earlier, I think it was Sinsoon mentioned this idea of a democracy of species, and sort of how is the concept of being a part of nature, not separate, like how does that inform how we think about the Adirondacks in the future? And we've been talking a little bit about this, but I wonder if you could say a little bit more, please.
So when it comes to ecocentrism in the Adirondacks, it sounds the term of Adirondacks, of course, is a created term. Ebenezer Evans is the first person that kind of conceived of even the name Adirondacks. And there's a lot of human centrism in this term. There's also the term of wilderness. And what is a wilderness? And the wilderness, the concept of what is a wilderness has really defined our thinking about the Adirondacks. And that has been debated back and forth. Usually the people that actually are living in the wilderness disagree with the people that are creating the policies that regulate the wilderness, or the industries that are quote unquote benefiting from that wilderness. But in all of these discussions, what is rarely mentioned is the ecosystems themselves and their voice. It's either how we can benefit from all the lumber. It's either how we can benefit from the nature itself, these beautiful places that in the words of the first people that, again, theorize about the Adirondacks, the first people, the Euro-American industrialists that first theorized about the Adirondacks, always talked about this need, this like purifying force. Being in nature it can cure the soul, it can cure the aches and pains of the body. Being in nature is an amazing elixir for the mind, and kind of wash away all of the, I'm not quoting verbatim, but all of these are words that were used, wash away kind of the stains of modernity. But this wilderness, again, it's a towel. It's a towel that people use to wash away all that soot from their factories. It's not an actual being that needs to be acknowledged and respected. Many different cultures around the world have different viewpoints that are not treating nature as a commodity. And those cultures are not just the cultures that are in this continent, what is known in this part of the world as Turtle Island. Throughout the Americas, what is known as Abya Yala, which is another name for the continent of what we know as America. This knowledge bases were also found in Europe before the beginning of the quote unquote Enlightenment, and the colonization of their colonization of the globe were found throughout the world. The fact that nature is part of your community. And that is something that really needs to come back, because as we know, the result of it not coming back is horrifying. So when it comes back for the Adirondacks, what does it mean for the wilderness to not be something that you own, but to be a friend, or that you are actually part of that wilderness? And it's a complicated concept, but hopefully if it actually is applied to policy, is applied to education, is applied to the economics of the Adirondacks, it can be game-changing.
Thank you so much for that, for your response. I feel like every time you both speak, I have like 10 more questions that come up in my brain. So I appreciate so much just sort of taking us outside this idea of that we are, again, here to like steward a certain place and be responsible for a certain place, as opposed to thinking about us as being kind of set in the as part of nature, and like reminding us that there are many other cultures out there that sort of look at this concept of wilderness and the concept of perhaps the Adirondacks itself as in an entirely different way. And it's so important to hear what those perspectives are, and how we might think about what those how we can bring those different perspectives together for a future for this conversation around the future of the Adirondacks, particularly in the face of the climate crisis. There's so many intersectional aspects of this, and like what does that really mean for us trying to sort of come up with how we plan for the future, and what systems that we need in place to support not just the ecosystems, but as you so eloquently put it, this sort of more people-centered approach to thinking about climate change with nature as part of it, as in our response to it. And I wonder, like, the other part of Luisa's quote talks about art as a necessary bridge. And so I want to shift a little bit, because I know all of our panelists tonight have experience in art in different ways, from dance, artist, story. And I want to talk a little bit about that. I'm looking at the time and realizing we're already like 20 minutes to the hour. So I want to be respectful of that. But I want to talk a little bit about the climate and art, and sort of our response to all of this through art. And maybe actually I'll start with you, Caroline, because I know you have this background with dance and music, and sort of your own, and story too, in your own sort of telling your own climate story. And I'm just wondering if you might talk a little bit about how you see art fitting into our response to climate change, the crisis here in the Adirondacks, and your thoughts about that.
Yeah, so I think that art, and art meaning like encompassing music, visual art, storytelling, any definition of art you may have, plays a really important role in talking about the environment and climate change, and kind of the impacts we're seeing in the Adirondacks and in general. I have seen how art has the power to really transform people's opinions and kind of experience, and kind of morph the way that you may think about even a place that you've lived in your whole life. And I've seen, for instance, through the Youth Climate Summit, I've seen how we've done a bunch of pretty powerful art installations that involve waste, or they involve living components, and there's an excellent example of that in the new climate exhibit at the Wild Center. There's a wall made of moss, and I think that having a visual representation of a visual or an auditory or what have you representation of the ecosystem that we live in, and kind of art that can kind of show how we interact with our ecosystem in ways that we might not think of, on a written page, can be really powerful. And storytelling is a particularly powerful mechanism, because the way that you kind of, I think, can gain a better appreciation for environmental injustice, especially coming from a place of relative privilege, is by hearing the stories of people who are experiencing climate impacts the most directly. And so in the Adirondacks, I mean, a good example of that is hearing the impacts of Hurricane Irene in 2011, and severe flooding and people who lost their homes, and kind of having a really tangible and personal interaction with people who have had these experiences can be a really powerful tool, especially in policymaking, because it can be the difference between people kind of brushing off problems and really personalizing them and saying, this is happening in my community.
Thank you so much, Caroline, for that response. And you really hit on this important idea that storytelling can help bridge those gaps, and has, and even so much of the research now coming out around climate communication is around the role of story in helping bridge those divides. And I know Blake and Sinsun, you're both incredible storytellers, and I wonder, and filmmakers and all of this, could you talk a little bit about how you use story in your work, and how you see the role of storytelling in helping to maybe shape a future Adirondacks.
So I completely agree with everything Caroline thinks. Yes, storytelling is a powerful tool to give a human voice to this crisis, because as Caroline said, the problem with this climate crisis, it is that it has been made also a political issue, an opinion issue, and also the science has been used as this weird tool, depending who has the money to say what, to discredit or to credit, but it doesn't really show the human side of what's happening. It doesn't really say anything about what's happening to the people that are impacted, to the species that are impacted, to the ecosystems that are impacted. So what we personally do with the storytelling, and we have done it through video, audio recording, and also illustration, is really trying to get the soul out of the matter, in the sense that what lies behind like all these, the wall of the climate crisis, because it's a huge wall and it's impenetrable, because it has the doomsday rhetoric in it. It has confusing science. It has political, like political opinions screaming left and right. So we have been trying to go beyond this wall and talk to the people and bring out the voice of what's happening. And through video, we have done that through videos, and like really talking to like agroecological farmers that are trying to find new ways to work with the land, that goes and also talk about food sovereignty, and works like that for what concerns the video. We are very aware that when you put the face of somebody in the movie image, you also are playing into like what media is and what the moving image is, and what it's the capturing, not what like anthropologically how the image has been used. You capture the image of something, you take it, and oftentimes you resell it. That's why we have tried also to use storytelling in a way that did not use the photography, video media, and we did more like installation art, dance, and also illustration, because we wanted to like go back and talk in a way that is not just determined by what screen you have in front of you, but that can also be more tactile and appreciated in a way that does not use the same words that we are bombarded constantly. The violence of the image that we are bombarded constantly, we're used to see. So you see a flood on video, you see fires on video, but they're far away, they're remote. We are trying to, through other kinds of, like through site-specific dance performances, through illustration, we are trying to bridge that gap between what humanity and this world is and what we are kind of having a hard time grappling with. That a lot of it is the problem of images, the images that we see and that we see too many and that we don't understand anymore, I think.
Thank you so much, Blake. I mean, it's you know, this idea of like utilizing art to build and create that bridge to empathy and compassion, and the types of art, you know, from the dance to storytelling to video to other types of media, and recognizing the need for a lot of different entry points into that space, because we because of the way that we consume information. But I really believe, and I know the work, you know, that you all do is, you know, through this idea of story and voice and sharing that to kind of to bring humanity, to center humanity in those climate impacts and what's happening, and to find ways to appeal to other people's humanity. So it's not just the statistic that we're seeing on a screen or in our news feed or whatever, that there's actually behind every one of those numbers of people impacted, like in Jackson, Mississippi with the water crisis, or in Pakistan with the flooding or the heat or the wildfires, whichever impact we're discussing, or Hurricane Irene, as Caroline alluded to, which is a very local impact, that idea of connecting at a human level and finding that compassion and empathy, and then hopefully and possibly, and this gets to one of the questions I saw come in, how can story help shape policy, and how can those stories be elevated so that we're hearing voices from more people that are included in the policy? And I know that in the very beginning, you Sinsoon, you talked about who's creating those policies and how is that getting created, and whose voices are being kind of put at that table. And I'm kind of definitely very much paraphrasing your eloquent introductory remarks, but I wonder if there's ways that you all could talk a little bit more about how the role of policy and who should be shaping policy now in the face of climate change, or what are some mechanisms or very specific ways that you might see that happening, whether it's through art and stories or other ways. There were a couple of questions coming in around specific policy that might help for the future of the Adirondack region. And maybe we'll start with, I guess, back to Blake and Sinsoon, and then we'll jump to Caroline.
So thank you so much for the questions, also the questions from the audience. When it comes to storytelling, it is, so like everybody said, it's essential. So I don't know if you all are familiar with what happened in Chile just on Sunday, in which they wrote in a constitutional process, constitutional convention process, they rewrote their constitution. The current constitution was written in the Pinochet era, which was basically under dictatorship. And they wanted to create something new. And that the creation of that constitution came from a process of large communities and populations coming together to say, no, we want to change. We need a change. It was the constitution, from my opinion, was a gorgeous constitution. What happened in the end, and a lot of the people that are working on it were our collaborators and friends, did such beautiful work. In one, they created different rights for water that were, because in Chile, water now is a commodity, and it's really commodified. They created rights for water, so water was basically could benefit all ecosystems and people, and it was just beautiful language. They gave rights to Mother Earth, or la Madre Tierra, rights to nature. They also created gender parity and gender equality within all forms of government. They created a plurinational nation in which all the nations within Chile, so all of the original people, indigenous nations, would have equal voice, their own legal systems. It was voted down. 60% of the people voted against it. There was a huge campaign, so social media campaign, huge television campaign against it. And they only got in the 30-something% of the vote. And so talking to the people, I was getting emotional because it was very sad when it happened. A lot of the people that we're talking to were very sad, but they said what failed was education, and there was a failure in storytelling. And that what needed to happen was storytelling. So storytelling is pivotal. When it comes to Adirondacks, yes, it's essential to actually create the narrative. Storytelling can lead directly into policy. And I think that's the work that we're doing. There was a question about directly, I'll pass it on to Caroline very soon, but there's a question directly about what happened in New Zealand, in which they granted rights to the Wanganui River. With the Te Aora Tupua Act, they granted rights to a national park, in which these waterways had their guardians. And these guardians were primarily from the Maori communities, but there was also some representation from settler communities. And we're kind of looking to do that here. And it's actually happening. We have in Canton, New York, I know it's not in the Adirondacks, but Canton, New York, which is currently discussing the creating of rights of waterways, Potsdam, New York as well, Akwesasne as well. And they were looking to work together. And we know other folks in the Adirondacks are interested. So that is actually happening at the moment, to co-create law together across different communities, from tribal, indigenous nations to different settler communities, to say, yes, we want to work together to create law simultaneously that is ecocentric, includes these rights, and hopefully can create a better future for all.
Thank you so much. Caroline, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, so I obviously have done a lot of studying of policy mechanisms for the environment at a pretty theoretical scale, and then kind of experienced it in practice at the international level, which has all of its own problems with lack of enforcement and things. But kind of the takeaway that I come out of those experiences with the most is that the most important policy changes and policy mechanisms we have in terms of creating tangible environmental change happen at the community level. And that's beneficial to all of us because we all live in communities. And I think that one of the most important things we can do is look into how, first of all, look into what policy initiatives might be underway already in our communities if we're not aware of them, but also look into what policy mechanisms are available, whether those are grant programs or whether those are support for different renewable energy development or what have you, or whether those have to do with issues that intersect with climate change and the climate crisis, like food security or infrastructure improvements, housing, jobs, etc. I think it's very important that we all recognize that if we're redefining stewardship to be including the rights of our ecosystem, we also need to include the ecosystem in all of the policy making that we're doing. So kind of expand the idea of environmental policy beyond just, like our traditional definition of environmental policy to kind of be more holistic and community scale. And I think one of, just to echo Sinsoon, one of the most important components of doing that is storytelling and inviting storytellers to be part of the policymaking process and to be part of the discussions at the table, and refraining from closing our doors of old white men in a room making decisions on behalf of entire communities, especially here in the Adirondacks.
Thank you so much for that, and just the commenting on some of how this might shape policy moving forward, because there is so much. And Caroline, you spoke about the the UN conferences, and I've had the opportunity to also attend some of those conferences, and that idea that yes, there's this big international policy making around climate change. And that's important. And there's a lot of complexity around that. That's like a whole other session. But the idea, like actually coming from the Glasgow climate talks last fall, was that what really for me was like focusing on like sort of what's happening locally and what can I do locally and what can I do regionally and at the state level that can help inform and think about what policies might move us forward and in dealing and addressing climate change and helping to build just and equitable communities for all as we look towards solutions, and recognizing that like so much of the solutions aspect around climate change has to include the ideas around justice and equity, and we cannot have climate solutions without having climate justice and social justice being absolutely integral and foundational underpinning for that work. And I think, I know some of the other sessions as part of this webinar series had you sort of thinking a little bit more about inclusivity and belonging and those ideas of who has access. And we've touched on this a little bit tonight in our conversation around stewardship. But I also wonder, thinking about the idea of climate, around climate solutions and around who's at the table and who's not at the table in those decisions. And I'm wondering from your perspectives, like, I think it's so interesting to think about this idea of like an ecosystem or a waterway needing to be at the table and who's going to speak for them. Like I think all of you have kind of circled around that. And I'm wondering if are there others that are missing, and how do we include them as we think forward, as in this sort of forward state, and how we move towards just and equitable solutions in communities across this region? Like who's still not at the table, and how might we shift that or change that? And maybe I'll go first to Blake and soon to respond.
So the North Country, so from the Adirondack to everything that is considered North Country, New York, it's a vast area and very isolated. So there is pockets of population, but they don't communicate. And we have islands of people that work in the little corner and don't know what's happening in other places. We see it often here in the college towns of Potsdam and Canton. They don't even know what happens in the town over or in the college over sometime. So for my experience, what I've noticed is that almost everybody's voice is missing. Like not only the ecosystems don't have the voice, but when it comes to like communities really talking, interacting, and really joining into solving the vast problems that the North Country has that are not just necessarily environmental when it comes to environmental pollution or degradation, but also like economical. I think we're missing the communities, we're missing the people, and it's a society that doesn't have those meeting points, and we see it very clearly in the North Country. And I think that's what we need to work with all together, rebuilding the bonds of this area, rebuilding the backbones of these regions, and recreate what we have lost somehow along the way. And I think if we bring back together the communities and the dialogue that happens in real life, I think we will have can rebuild a society that can withstand and look forward to a sustainable future. Because like this, the biggest fear that I see in these like scattered little towns that don't communicate is that at a certain point when things become dire, people from like millionaires from outside, big corporations from outside are gonna just come in and flatten everything and get rid of everybody who's here now and like destroy and substitute in a very violent way with gentrification, as we have seen in other places. So we are still in a state in which this area is being depopulated. How do we stop that? And how do we rebuild the connections that are lacking? And we rebuild the communities, and then we will have everybody in the table, from the nature that we are trying to protect and give like personhood, like a voice to, but also the people that live in it.
And just to add one very quick thing, when we think about who needs to be on that table, as Blake said, a lot of people are missing, and to really create events or meetings in which you really make it a point that in this meeting that is deciding on policy issues, you have somebody who is below 16, you have a 15, 14-year-old, they're present at the meeting. Make sure that you have an elder present at the meeting. Make sure that you have always somebody from one of the original people communities, whether that be at Akwesasne or elsewhere, at the meeting. And make sure that you really are trying to talk to people who are not just the wealthy people who have the time to talk about environmental policy, the time and the resources, but the people who don't, and make sure that they have a sustenance or like even financially time, like even like they can take the time, make it financially possible for them to take the time to be part of that conversation. It's very important that to take away all the gaps, all the dams, and let the rivers flow and let the conversation flow.
Thank you so much for, really naming the barriers that exist for full participation and really, this concept of not just being at the table, but moving the table to where you can find people and creating opportunities where everyone feels welcome and engaged and respected, and they're perspectives honored as part of these conversations. I really appreciate that. Caroline, do you have any additional thoughts around, and I know we're already past a little bit of time, so I just recognizing everyone's time, I have a couple more questions, and then I have one more question that I would like to ask the panel, and we do have a few more in the Q&A, but I just want to acknowledge that it is 8:06, but the conversation is just like I have so many questions I didn't ask, but Caroline, do you want to talk a little bit about who's at the table or not at the table, or from your perspective, like how that might happen or where that needs to happen?
Yeah, I mean, I actually don't have a whole lot to add, because since you touched on exactly what I was going to say, which was that these discussions need to be intergenerational and involve both young people and our elders, because otherwise we're not representing those who have been here the longest or those who will be here the longest. And I was also going to touch on what Blake said about kind of the depopulation of this area, and that if we don't, simply put, if we don't have places to live, people will no longer live here, and that's becoming an extremely salient issue, especially in my region in Saranac Lake and Lake Placid, where entire swaths of land and all of these enormous houses are empty, and they sit empty nearly all of the time. And so we can't have communities if we don't have people living in them. And the last thing I was going to say is just making sure that our discussions are efficient, and I don't mean that in a like media efficiency standpoint so much as making sure that we're not spending all of this time going over and over like basic facts of what we need to be doing, and that we're making people do the work that they need to do on their own to be caught up and to be here with us, making the solutions that we know. We know the bones of how to create them, and we just need to kind of elaborate on them and make these policies tangible.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Caroline, for that comment. One last sort of, I guess, question from me, and then we can, there are a few other questions that came in on the chat, and feel free if you're, or not on the chat, I'm sorry, the Q&A. So if you're out there in the audience and you have some additional questions for us, please respond. One of the things that I think about a lot in this work around this intersectional and challenging work around climate change and thinking about solutions and stewardship is that it can be really hard. It can be really, I want to just acknowledge, like, there's so much grief in all of this, and like, at any moment you just like listen to the news for 5 seconds and it's like there's so much grief there, and loss of life, and sort of the heart, sort of maybe coming up against some of these systems that created these challenges. You can feel, or at least I can feel powerless at times, and like finding the I don't mean to get emotional, but it is emotional. It is, I mean, I guess I should acknowledge it is a really emotional work. And that I wonder, there's this wonderful quote from this urban gardener by the name of Karen Washington. She's a community gardener in the Bronx. And she says, and if you don't mind, I'm just going to read, "We can be joyful while we're trying to change the world, as long as we're also aware that you can't get away with things just by doing the easy stuff. You actually have to challenge certain things and put yourself in uncomfortable positions, often risking things in order to achieve real change." And I wonder if we could just spend just a moment on the joy of the work, and like where, and maybe that also speaks to the hope. And I'm wondering if you all could share a little bit about where you find joy in this work, in the work that you're doing. And I think, why don't we start with Caroline first this time, and then we'll go to Blake and Sinsun.
Sure. I definitely find joy in spaces like this, where I can speak with people who you know, frankly, who spend as much time worried about this as I do, and also who spend at the same time spend as much time, you know, grinding away at thinking about how we can fix it. And I think, I mean, also similarly, I do a number of different, I serve in a number of different roles where I interface with different generations of people, and kind of try to bring climate discussions into those roles. When I'm coaching children, I like to kind of discuss their experiences with the winters here, or I like to say, you know, hey, it's all thawed, and like how can we kind of think about that, and maybe use our experiences with this sport to motivate us to change. And I also, you know, interact with my faith communities and kind of help people in those communities understand how our faith can motivate us to work together on climate action. And ultimately, I guess the short answer to the question is community is where I find hope and joy, and kind of spreading the message of hope, and also working together on solutions, and avoiding kind of siloed solution making spaces, and collaborating across barriers that you might not have thought to collaborate across, is what brings me the most hope in this work. And yeah, and I'm grateful to continue to have these conversations, and to know that that we're all in this together.
Thank you so much, Caroline, for sharing that. Blake and Sensoon.
So yes, this kind of work can really bring to dark places, particularly when you hear the news and so on. So I completely agree. And the news are all based on the doomsday rhetoric, so usually don't even tell you if there's something good happening. I think what gives me hope, or at least keeps me going, is that I'm a pessimist. I'm a pessimist, and from starter, I will tell you all the reasons why it will not work. And then it works. And people are like, oh, I like this. Or like, oh, yes, let's do this. And I'm like, oh my gosh. And since I started from nowhere, I got 100% satisfaction, because I was so negative about it that, I mean, we got something out. So I think that is what keeps me going, because I can see why it cannot work, and life proves me that it can instead. And that's the most beautiful thing, that even in this complicated, often broken society, in which oftentimes you're made believe that you will never agree on anything, you still find like-minded people. And just by talking and planting those seeds and just saying, okay, I'm gonna try to go for no matter what, even if everybody's gonna throw tomatoes at me, instead the tomatoes don't come and something good comes out of it. So that's what gives me the most hope. And also just looking out of my window and see the grass river, sometimes even just walking like 2 minutes to the bridge and looking down and seeing this immense body of water and feeling like, well, it's been keeping me alive. I am here on this planet, and there's so much more than just the cement roads and poles and walls, and that too gives me hope, because I know that they're not giving up on us. And that's why I want to keep on going with them and for them too.
And just to add on to kind of things that everybody's been saying, particularly speaking to the hope, where does the hope come from? And for me, the hope comes from multiple places, and it does come from what people have been saying. It comes from community. community is a very hopeful and beautiful place. And other places in southern Abya Yala, people call the American continent, they use the word tejidos, which is tapestries or weaving. Estamos tejiendo resistencia. We're weaving together resistance. And that act of weaving and bringing communities together is a very beautiful one. You see it happening, and it's just like mentioned, the seed is planted and it grows, and it is just beautiful. And out of nowhere, a connection happens, and you sustain it. You give each other support, and from that process, beautiful things can flourish. And then Blake mentioned also the beautiful river, the Nikinsiaga Grass River that's close to where we live, which flows from the Adirondack Mountains to its confluence with the Great River, with the St. Lawrence River. And we know that what's known as the quote unquote American eel travels all the way from the ocean to up into these waterways. However, because of lots of complicated things, from the climate crisis to overfishing to the dams, that migration has been stymied. Yet we know that the dam, which is very close to where we live, which is called the Madrid Dam, and usually blocks migration from fish up the river to the Adirondacks, has not proved too insurmountable for this species, because an eel has climbed up the dam and has tried to make it further in. And if those little beings can try to climb a dam and go above, then why can't we try to do the same?
Well, those were such beautiful responses. I feel like we should maybe wrap this, because we are now at 8:17 on a high note. And thank you so much. And I know there were a few questions that we didn't get to, but we are going to actually be following up with some more conversations in November, and I'm going to let Eric speak to that in just a second. But I firstly wanted to thank Caroline, Blank, and Soon for your very thoughtful responses and comments tonight, and just for your time and just spirit in being here. I just really appreciated the honesty and honest conversation, and just all that you brought to it, and sort of really a really beautiful way, I think, to also wrap up this series on certainly not ending the conversation, but maybe putting a little bit of a period on the series that was so sponsored by the Adirondack Experience in partnership with all the other organizations that Eric mentioned at the beginning. I think that was a beautiful conversation, and I was so grateful to be a part of it. So thank you. Eric, I'm going to turn it over to you to share a little bit about the upcoming symposium in November, and maybe we can get to some of those questions we didn't get to tonight in the symposium.
Well, let me also say thank you so much, Caroline, Blake, Sinzun, and Jen, for being with us this evening and sharing your stories, and such a sophisticated but humane conversation. And I think we can all agree that stories questioning, challenging status quo assumptions about how we organize a relationship to the natural world is just so critically important, not only for the Adirondacks region, but across borders and boundaries as well. So thank you so much again. Thank you so much to all of you who have attended this program, who have attended multiple programs across this series. I'm so very grateful to have you spend time with us. And I hope you will spend more time with us this coming November, on November 1st, 2nd, and 4th, when we will host a week-long symposium series, building upon, expanding upon some of the conversations that took place over this past summer. There will be more information about the symposium series forthcoming on the Adirondack Experience website. We hope you will tune in. Again, just our heartfelt thanks to our speakers this evening, and thank you so much to the folks joining us, and we hope you have a wonderful evening. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.